everyone. The pale blue dot is that iconic photograph of Earth taken way back in 1990, which Carl Edward Sagan, the American planetary scientist, described as "that's there, that's home, that's us." On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives. Greetings on behalf of Hidayatullah National Law University. We are gathered here together on occasion of two-day International Conference on International Trade in Maritime Life and Fisheries. Hidayatullah National Law University conducts periodic academic programs with the aim to deliver and discourse on strengthening of law and legal systems in India. This conference today and today's panel discussion titled Navigating the Intersection of Blue Economy, Human Rights and Developing Countries, a Comprehensive View is one such attempt on behalf of the university. On behalf of the university and the organizing committee, I extend my deepest gratitude to our esteemed professor, Avijit Das sir, for agreeing to deliver the opening remarks today. Professor Das has more than 2 decades of experience in research, practice, and teaching international trade law, and has worked as the head for the Center of WTO Studies, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, New Delhi. He has also represented India in several multilateral and bilateral trade negotiations, including the Doha rounds of WTO and the OECD still subsidies rounds. I welcome you, sir, and your motivating welcoming remarks will be the stimuli for the panel to delve with extra vigor in today's theme for discussion. Please also join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists for today's discussion. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Madhu VR, Principal Scientist at the ICAR Central Institute of Fisheries Technology, Kochi. Sir is working on aspects related to responsible fishing operations along the Indian coastal line. It is an honor to welcome Dr. Sanu Jacob, Director, National Food Laboratory, Chennai. Sir has also worked as Joint Director, Export Inspection Council of India, and also as a faculty of Kerala University of Fisheries and Ocean Studies. We have with us Mr. Amod Ashok Salgaonkar, Director, Chamber for Advancement of Small and Medium Businesses, India. Sir has his master's degree in Fisheries Resource Management from Central University of Fisheries Education. I extend my warm welcome to Ms. Ipshita Chaturbedi, partner Denton Rondix Corporate Practice Group, and she co-heads the Environment and National Resources Practices, which includes transactions like carbon transactions, deployment of climate finance, responsible businesses and human rights and biodiversity laws. We have with us today Ms. Anu Monga, partner Anant Law from Singapore, who has more than 16 years of practice and has advised on legal matters relating to international trade, WTO, competition, antitrust laws across various sectors. Ms. Monga has also featured as Thomson Reuters 50 most influential lawyers in India for the year 2020. It is a pleasure to host Mr. Byron Mentius, Senior Associate, Steptoe and Johnson LLP from Belgium, Europe. Mr. Byron focuses on several areas of EU and international trade, which includes anti-dumping, anti-subsidy investigations, economic sanctions, export controls, customs law, etc. I extend my welcome to our last panelist for today's discussion, Ms. Shishira Johnny, Consultant and Assistant Professor, Center for WTO Studies, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, New Delhi. She has also worked as consultant at the Center in Services Division of ITC, a collaborative project between UNCTAD and WTO. It is a great privilege to have a panel consisting of panelists from diverse geographic as well as industry background for today's panel discussion. I take this opportunity on behalf of Hidayatullah National Law University and the organizing committee to welcome you all. Your presence will help us in gaining a multidisciplinary understanding of both academic and industry outlook on today's discussion. That is, blue economy, human rights, and developing countries, a comprehensive study. I now invite Professor Avijit Das to deliver the opening remarks.
Thank you. At the outset, let me express my sense of gratitude and appreciation to Hidayatullah National Law University, the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, for organizing this two-day International Trade in Marine Life and Fisheries conference, and for providing me an opportunity to share some thoughts in this session, which is titled Navigating the Intersection of Blue Economy, Human Rights, and Developing Countries, a Comprehensive View. Let me also extend my gratitude to all the esteemed panelists, and I'm delighted to be sharing the panel with very illustrious names. And I'm very happy to have Shishira Joni, who was my erstwhile colleague till a few months ago at the Center for WTO Studies. The focus of this session is clearly on the blue economy. And if we look at how different organizations define blue economy, the starting point normally is what does World Bank say on this? And according to the World Bank, blue economy is the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic development, improved livelihoods and jobs, while preserving the health of ocean ecosystems. Now, although there is no commonly agreed definition of this term, it normally comprises three important components. First, contribution of oceans to economic activities, creating jobs, creating wealth. Second, constituent element is sustainability of oceans and ocean resources, particularly from the environmental ecological perspective. And the third is that these economic activities which center around oceans provide an opportunity for growth for both developed as well as developing countries. And a useful peg for taking this discussion forward is to remind ourselves about Sustainable Development Goal 14.4, which mentioned that by 2020, the UN members would effectively regulate harvesting and ending overfishing, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, and destructive fishing practices, implementing science-based management plans in order to restore fish stocks in the shortest possible time. If we look at developments at some of the important multilateral platforms when it comes to marine life, then two developments come immediately to our mind. First and foremost, the interim agreement on fisheries subsidies, which WTO members arrived at in June 2022. That started with the mandate in the Doha round. I will delve a bit into what this agreement is all about, although I do realize that Professor Mukesh Bhatnagar, who is perhaps the best informed person in this area, he had delivered an important address in one of the sessions yesterday. So the WTO's fisheries subsidies agreement, the interim agreement, is one important development which we need to bear in our mind. And at the same time, we also have another important agreement which has recently been, in a way, agreed, that is commonly called the High Seas Agreement or Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions, BBNJ. Now, the crux of these agreements really is centering around sustainability. But when we look at sustainability, we also have to look at the development perspective. And that is an important point for me to share some details about the fisheries subsidies agreement, which was agreed to on 17th June 2022. And just to remind ourselves that these negotiations on fisheries subsidies go back to the year 2001. If we look at the Doha Ministerial Conference declaration, there was an articulation of the need to clarify and improve WTO disciplines on fisheries subsidies, taking into account the importance of this sector to developing countries. And there was a cross-reference in the mandate to trade and environment as well. And it is not surprising that these negotiations were highly contested, and these negotiations have not yet been concluded. Why I'm saying that, I'll come to it shortly. But also important to bear in mind that these negotiations were undertaken under three pillars. The first pillar is commonly referred to as IUU, which is really need to eliminate subsidies provided for illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. And in the interim agreement agreed to last year, WTO members have decided to eliminate IUU subsidies for IUU fishing and fishing related activities. And of course, developing countries have been provided a 2-year grace period during which dispute action will not be taken against them. And this 2-year period kicks in after the date of implementation of the fisheries subsidies agreement. Similarly, the second pillar relates to stocks which are already overfished. And the discipline which has been agreed by membership is that no member shall grant or maintain subsidies for fishing or fishing related activities in respect of an overfished stock. How will stocks be determined if they are overfished? Who determines it? Well, this determination has to be undertaken by a coastal member under whose jurisdiction fishing is taking place, or by a relevant regional fisheries management organization in areas and for species under its competence, based on the best scientific evidence available. And just like the IUU fishing subsidies fishing pillar, a 2-year transition period has been granted to developing countries during which they can provide subsidies within their EEZ for overfished stocks. But after the 2-year transition period, once the fisheries agreement starts getting implemented, they will be prohibited from giving subsidies to overfished stocks. So in respect of both these pillars, we already have an agreement. But the most contentious and really relevant is the third pillar, on which at the last minute there were some glitches and the membership could not agree to final disciplines, and hence this agreement is only interim in nature. The third pillar pertains to subsidies that contribute to overfishing and overcapacity. Now, the intention of the developed countries was to prohibit subsidies which can contribute to overfishing and overcapacity, but that met with considerable resistance from developing countries. The deal which was struck last year, what it says is that no member shall grant subsidies to fishing or fishing related activities outside the jurisdiction of a coastal member or a coastal non-member and outside the competence of a relevant RFMO. Now, the important points to note over here is that it allows countries to grant subsidies in their fishing activities, even if those are undertaken legally in the territorial waters or in the SEZs of another member. This is commonly referred to as distant water fishing. And the important point to note is who has the capacity for distant water fishing? Very few countries, mainly developed countries. How did these countries acquire the capacity to undertake distant water fishing? Mainly through government intervention, through government subsidies. Most of the marine capture, almost three-fourths of the marine capture, is through industrial fishing fleets. And to remind ourselves, these industrial fishing fleets were really developed on the back of government intervention and government subsidies. And if we look at who have these large industrial fishing fleets, mainly China, European Union, Russia, US, Norway, South Korea, Chinese Taipei, Japan, Iceland, etc. Now, the interesting thing is countries are allowed to give subsidies even if they go and fish in the territorial waters or SEZs of other countries. That it has not been prohibited under the Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies. Whom does it benefit? Countries whose catch really arises from their fishing activities in other countries' EEZs. To illustrate, China, almost 40% of its catch is in the EEZ of other countries. European Union, 39 to 40% of its catch again is in the EEZ of other countries. In respect of Norway, 30% of the catch is in the EEZ of other countries. For South Korea, Chinese Taipei, again, these figures are very high. The message which I'm trying to drive home is that countries whose large proportion of marine catch arises in the EEZ of other countries, they would be at liberty to continue to subsidize their fishing activities. So whether this agreement will do too much for sustainability is a big question. It's also important to remind ourselves that under the third pillar of subsidies that contribute to overfishing and overcapacity, the attempt was, and this attempt will get revived again, I have little doubt in that, to make sure that countries don't give subsidies for creating new fishing fleets or expanding existing fishing fleets. Who would be adversely affected? Countries like, let us say, Argentina, Turkey, India, etc., who really at this juncture do not have very large scale industrial fishing fleets. These countries really will not be able to get into industrial fishing. Who will continue with industrial fishing? Those who already have a huge industrial fishing fleet, which was created basically on the back of government intervention and government subsidies. So the message appears to be very clear. Behind the veneer of sustainable fishing, those who have the capacity, they will continue to engage in fishing, whereas most developing countries who have not created the capacity for high sea fishing, they will never be able to create capacity. So, number one, the agreement on fisheries subsidies may not really do too much for sustainability. It may not do much for development as well. So when the negotiations on this issue resume, in fact, they have resumed already at the WTO, that will be a right opportunity for countries, developing countries, to make sure that their future development prospects in the marine sector does not get hampered through this agreement. That brings me to the issue of human rights. Now, human rights are not directly addressed through the subsidy, through the agreement on fisheries subsidies, although there was an attempt by the United States to get countries to notify any information which they may have about fisheries activities undertaken through forced labor. That does not appear in the final agreement. And to my mind, rightly so. WTO certainly is not the place for addressing issues such as human rights. But having said that, there is an alternate perspective, and I think it would be in fairness to provide the alternate perspective. Let me just mention what Ernst Ulrich Petersmann, one of the leading lights on WTO law, what his perception is, and I'm quoting him over here. What he says is the traditional disregard in WTO law of human rights is becoming as outdated as persistent disregard in international human rights instruments for economic liberalization and freedom of trade as preconditions for individual welfare. He also envisages the possibility for, and I'm quoting him again, another human rights revolution in favor of non-discriminatory open markets, global competition, and more effective human rights protection. The message which I derive from what Ernst Ulrich Petersmann and those of his ilk they want to deliver is very simple. Use human rights to open markets, use sustainability to preserve the advantage which developed countries already enjoy. Now, I know this is being a bit provocative, but I thought that it's relevant to provide this perspective, because when we talk of fisheries subsidies, when we talk of sustainability, we tend to buy into the narrative which is created by the developed countries and their cheerleaders all around, that it's really about protecting the environment. To my mind, it is partly about protecting the environment, but more about closing the doors on the developing countries for their growth potential in the marine sector. And this overall approach is not just confined to the marine sector. If we look at some of the free trade agreements, they have similar provisions, be it in mining, be it in other forms of natural resources. Environment, sustainability is being taken as an instrument to constrain the development potential of a large number of developing countries. So with that heretical perspective, let me stop over here and let me thank all of you for your very kind attention. And I'll be eagerly looking forward to the views of my fellow panelists. Thanks once again.
Thank you, Professor, for those wonderful comments. In fact, I'm glad that you spoke about the impact, pardon me, of the fisheries agreement on blue economy, because that was one of the first questions I wanted to pose to you. But before we get to the questions, I'd like to welcome all the panelists once more. I'm Shreya H, and I'll be moderating today's session. I'll pose a question to each of the panelists, but do feel free to chip in if you have something to add to another panelist question as well. So now straight back to you, Professor Abhijit, just carrying forward from your speech, what according to you can be done by the WTO to achieve blue justice and promote blue economy?
As I mentioned earlier, the basic template which the developed countries are following is very clear, which is to use the sustainability as the veneer for impeding development objectives of developing countries. I think developing countries need to realize that they need to forcefully challenge this narrative. They need to join hands and make sure that few of those who can create this capacity for expanding their economic activities, they are able to have their interests protected. To give you just very simple illustration, India had put in a proposal seeking 25 years carve out from this subsidies contributing to overfishing and overcapacity. Let's see to what extent we will end up having a provision which fulfills this objective of India. So that could be one way, through special and differential treatment provisions, that the interests of developing countries could be protected.
Got it, sir. And what according to you, does the future of blue economy look like in a couple of decades?
Okay, again, my heretic perspective, the developing countries do not realize the perils they are confronted with. And the future of blue economy is most likely to be that those who have the capacity to exploit the marine resources, they will almost have a free run of the blue waters. And developing countries are very unlikely to make substantial or meaningful gains from the blue economy unless they get their act together in the international negotiating forums. Sorry to give you this pessimistic outlook, but that really appears to be the reality.
All right, Professor. That's unfortunate, but I'm glad that we're all clear on where we stand as far as the future of blue economy goes, and hopefully something turns for the future and developing countries do get their act together going forward. Now on to Dr. Madhu. Uh, Dr. Madhu, are you on the panel? So what exactly is sustainable fishing, and can the same ever be achieved?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Yeah, and thank you, Professor Abhijit, for the excellent opening remarks. So this has set a stage for us to open up. Yeah, sustainable fishing basically is, yeah, as the traditional, the definition of sustainability itself, like the type of fishing which doesn't hamper the future, basically. Yeah, in case of, like, if you ask me, sustainable fishing, is it possible? Yeah, to a certain extent, it's possible. But then there are a lot of, uh, ramifications to that, and a lot of factors that really goes into it, right from the resource itself, like, because it's a complex resource. There are a lot of factors: environmental, political, social, market, and everything that works together for this to happen. But then, as I told, we are just if you tell about, like, say, if it is modeling of an ecosystem, like, if you really want to know, like, whether a stock is sustainable or not, I'm talking about a particular stock. So in fact, our knowledge of like what happens out at sea, that is quite limited. So even though we have end-to-end models which say that these are the factors which really contribute to the stock, and then we have so much of fish going out and so much of effort coming in and all these things, but then our knowledge, I would say, is maybe just 50% of like what actually happens in the field. So sustainable fishing, basically, it could happen, but then there are, as I told, there are a lot of factors which has to go to work in tandem, and also there are a lot of, and there's a lot of science that needs to be put into it for this to happen. Yeah, thank you.
So, going forward, there have been some human rights concerns in fishing and aquaculture as well. So, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, regarding human rights violations, like, yeah, of course, we have, although I don't directly deal with this because I mostly work on fishing technology, where we devise methods to sustainably capture fisheries. But then we have been in cases like bonded labor, then forced labor, and also extended working hours, where they don't where the fishers really don't get a voice to say, like, what's happening and all. But then I think the core issue in this is we really lack traceability, particularly in most of these situations. Like, we really don't know, like, if, say, for example, a fishing vessel goes out at sea, we really don't know, like, what's happening there. So once it's in, the amount of terms identify whether the fishing vessel that is going out is actually doing fishing, or how many people are there on. We really lack such facilities. But most of these countries, the advanced countries, they really have vessel monitoring systems. They have a very strict monitoring, control, and surveillance mechanisms. So then, in most of these developing countries, this is lacking. one aspect to this is like we really, we need legislations, and then also to implement these to understand like what's going on in actual field conditions. A very simple
Uh,
thing is
Sir, sorry to interrupt.
like
There's a bit of a glitch. We're not able to hear you.
there was no record. There was no record of really how many people have perished there. So this is a type of thing happening. So we need strict monitoring, control, and surveillance for this. And maybe once you do that, then this would really help. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, on to Dr. Sanu. Sir, what according to you is the link between blue economy and food security for all?
An opportunity. Of course, a large part has already been dealt by Professor Abhijit. I'll again reiterate, like the blue economy, ultimately, it can be linked to the food safety, because ultimately what you derive from the blue economy is the food, and it is for us to see that it is safe and it is free from the contaminant. So definitely there is a clear link between the two, as the ocean provides a significant portion of the world's food supply, which includes the fish and the seafood, even the seaweed. And as the demand is growing, it is very essential that the resources which are harvested sustainably, at the same time, the seafood is also safe for the human consumption. And this is where the blue economy has to, balance, or has to take both the food security as well as the food safety hand in hand. Of course, the sustainable fishing practice in aquaculture is also one of the good ways, because we are seeing some reports of banned antibiotics or substances, even heavy metal contaminations like cadmium or mercury challenges that are coming from the seafood into the seafood. So in that way, there is definitely a link, and one need to control both sides. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, on to Mr. Amod Ashok. So, according to you, I would like to pose the same question to you on your take of where the future of blue economy is headed. And also, if you could talk about the impact of blue economy on small and medium businesses.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think to your first question, what does that future of blue economy look like? So I have some different thoughts than what Mr. Abhijit Das had just stated. Say billions of people are dependent on ocean resources or various businesses associated with the ocean and ocean related resources. The land is limited, and with increased encroachment every day, the chances of availability of more land is reducing. Though we say we now have AI, advanced technologies, but yet my strong feeling is that we know very less about the oceans and its vast potential utilization that we may make. Now, I will explain this through two examples. Now, everyone is aware about the aquaculture, which is happening on the land and also in the sea through cage culture. But no one thought in the past there can be high-end ships which can be deployed in ocean, in which the fish culture can be done on board. Now, this is a very different and high-risk idea in the present scenario. However, this is a very perfect idea in the long run. How? Say by the time years will pass, this business will overcome on challenges they may be facing today, but think from the other angle. That particular theme and technology is very much useful down the line 20 years, because oceans are unlimited and larger expansion of the same will be helpful for the human itself. Now, this is the future vision, and it's 100% associated with the blue economy. The smart ship aquaculture concept has been successfully deployed by China, and few of those ships, for example, I don't know whether anyone among the participants and for that matter speakers have heard about it or not, but China-based fish farming ship Conson number one has become the first large yellow croaker farm to achieve the Aquaculture Stewardship Council certification in December 2022. It is the world's first full-scale smart farming ship which can produce 3,700 tons of large yellow croaker annually. Now, local high-end retail company Ole has begun discussions to promote and source ASC certified large yellow croaker for consumers in China. Now, this I'm talking about only one ship. Think when there will be the deployment in thousands or millions over the period of years. Does it not create the greater ecosystem? That will definitely create. Now, the second thing, everyone is knowing that the global warming and ice melting, right? It has resulted in increasing the mean sea levels. So the countries who are not far above than the mean sea levels are facing the problems because of the fear to get submerged in the next few years. One of the very good example is Maldives. It is not an unknown fact that many of the Maldivian islands are less than 1 meter from the sea level. As per few of the reports, the islands will go under the water by 2100. And this is the prime reason for building a floating city in Maldives, because a floating city will have no effect even if the water level rises. Now, think from this point that they are facing a problem and they come up with a solution. But if it becomes successful, then you see the large potential scope to utilize the oceans for human being, and we can reduce our dependency on the land. Of course, it shall be altogether a different ball game, but from creating a new ecosystem point of view, it will definitely change the scenarios of the business, and that leads to the stronger blue economy. See, there is nothing constant without a change, and there might be many such themes or works we can experiment from now so that our future shall be brilliant, because we are creating the opportunities from the problems we are facing. And as many of them are associated with the oceans, hence blue economy is bound to grow. I'm confident about it from now. Now there might be the varied opinions, but that is from my context. Now, coming back to your another question, that how would be the impacts on the small and medium businesses, impact of the blue economy. So there are many things which are happening, particularly for the MSEs or SMEs. You can say any of the thing, but I will particularly say that how this particular blue economy related thing have entirely changed or developed, particular the situation of small and medium businesses. Whether anyone have heard about the name of the country Seychelles? This has introduced the world's first sovereign blue bond in 2018, and through that they have helped many of the small and medium businesses. Now, what is this blue bond concept? This blue bond is an innovative financial instrument which is used to raise the financing from capital market investors for the projects that supports the sustainable use of ocean resources. Now, government of Seychelles has raised the bond from private investors for an amount of $15 million with a maturity of 10 years and for the interest payments of 6.5%. Private investors have invested in the bond because of partial guarantee from the World Bank. GAF supported government of Seychelles with concession loan of $5 million for covering the coupon payments. In general, that has helped Seychelles to lower down its interest percent from 6.5 to 2.8. Seychelles will pay the bondholders from the central budgets, and the proceeds from the bond, which are included for the support of expansion of marine protected areas, then improved governance of priority fisheries, as well as the development of the entire Seychelles blue economy. Now, the grants and loan arrangements, those have been done through the Blue Grant Fund and the Blue Investment Fund, have been managed by the government entities. In short, that particular fund has been raised through bond and managed by the government approved entities, has been further distributed to various of small, medium, and micro businesses, those who are associated with the blue economy, so that they develop their business well. Now, this is going on in a very well way and benefiting many of the micro and small businesses. Now, why this is been perfectly working well in Seychelles? Because Seychelles is quite more dependent on the fisheries and aquaculture businesses. It is just one of the example that how the financial resources can be generated and made available to required small businesses by involving the major stakeholders so that it can help grow the entire ecosystem on the sustainable basis. Now, whether this has been replicated in different countries, I think no. Whether it is possible, I think yes. Now, the green bonds do exist in the business environment since long. However, whether blue bond is a new concept, but can be very much useful for the small and medium businesses if it can be used in a very well manner. This is one of the way to support on how the small businesses can be impacted, but there lies, of course, many ways for the promotion of blue economy. Now, coming back to the India, or consider a case of MSMEs in India. There are almost say 1.7 crore of registered micro enterprises. Whether small enterprises numbers are around 4.26 lakhs and mid-size enterprises are around 39,467. Now, unfortunately, there is no any categorization of SMEs at a sectoral level to my knowledge. So it shall be difficult to say how many are the exact SMEs involved in the blue economy. Having said that, on an average, India exports every year more than 45,000 crore worth of seafood and aquaculture products export. Now, from all the exporters, which this is happening, they are not crossing, or they are not say in the range of 250 or 1000 crores. Not all the exporters, there are many who are falling below the annual turnover of 250 crores. That means there are many medium businesses, those who are supporting for the seafood and for the blue economy. Blue economy, of course, not only covers seafood and aquaculture, but it also includes the port and shipping business, tourism, offshore renewable energy, water sanitation, and many of the things. Then last but not the least, I will also consider the startups as a small and medium businesses. And few numbers I would like to share over here is India is number 3 in the world in number of unicorns. India is number 2 in the world in the number of startups, and India is number 1 in the world with the new startups adding each day. In 2021, India added number of unicorns every 29 days. In 2022, India added number of unicorns every 9 days. Now, among these startups, whether there are any fisheries and seafood startups? The answer is yes. They are very few, but they are there. Consider the example of Alicious or Captain Fresh or Aqua Connect or Fresh to Home. So there are many organizations, those who are coming in this space and particularly trying to do the various other things which rest of the organizations have not did in a previous manner. Whether they are totally profitable or not is a different question, but at the same time they are providing the employment to lot many people. Presently, if we go on the turnover basis, maybe they will fall under the medium businesses size, but they are doing it. The point is they are helping to the blue economy. So there are various impacts of small of and medium businesses when we take into consideration for blue economy. And of course, if anyone have any different thoughts, I will be happy to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The concept of a sovereign blue bond is something that we have not a lot of us have heard before. So thank you for that. And if I may just bring in Ms. Ikshita onto the same point and drawing from Mr. Amol's comments, what according to you is the link between green economy and blue economy? And could you shed more light on the intersectionality of both of them?
Hi everyone, very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Just wondering why would you do this on a Sunday? But anyway, the link really between green and blue economy, they're the same things. One is on land and the other is in water. That's really the basic core difference between the two. When we look at green economy, so an economy is an esoteric concept. However, when you want to legally articulate it, um, as Amod spoke about, you look at bonds, you look at impact, you look at some of the financial instruments, and that's when the legal articulation of what actually green or blue means comes across. So for example, if it's a renewable project on land, that would be a green economy project, which means it's going to be a green financial instrument. And blue economy or blue financial instruments are always and only particular to oceans, marine health, or offshore renewable energy. So the link between the two, of course, is sustainability, which means any kind of emissions reductions or pollution control or waste management systems, basically an additionality to show that we were behind and we have done something through our investment or through our efforts to lower the impact, the carbon impact. That is what the green or the blue bit entails. But so that the intersectionality, of course, is sustainability at its core, which includes several parameters, but largely that's the link. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing. One's on land, one's in water.
What according to you can be some tangible steps that the world must take to just remove to reduce the threats that plague our oceans today?
I don't think, like the world, I don't know, but I can tell you about the private sector at least, or governments. First of all, there's intent and political will from the government side, because everything else can be sorted, but a lack of intent cannot be. Uh, Secondly, I think so far as the private sector is concerned, I think there's also a massive dearth of knowledge in understanding how ecosystem management works. Sustainability and ESG are the big buzzwords right now, but there are not many qualified people, particularly in the private sector. There's a massive lack of scientists and science-based evidence, which I think are some of the barriers. So in terms of oceans pollution, oceans, like the nature of the resource, the pollution itself is quite broad. So far in private practice, what I'm seeing is, let's look at what are the biggest issues the oceans currently face. Of course, there's fishery, there's plastic, uh, and then there are like some of the other stuff. Now, when you look at the new oceans agreement, you will also notice that a lot of developed countries studiously and strategically leave fisheries out of it. So while we are talking about several other things, we're talking about deep sea mining, somehow fisheries will be left out. That is because of the massive subsidies that those governments are funded by, the massive fisheries lobbies that prevent the main cause of pollution, which is actually large scale fishing and trawler fishing, which we kind of don't address at all. Leaving behind fisheries, if we look at shipping as a sector, some of the massive issues in the shipping sector are really ballast water, sulfur. However, currently, the focus and the advisory that I work on is mainly decarbonizing shipping. So, because again, that's linked to a green financial instrument or blue financial instrument called the Poseidon Principles. So, Poseidon Principles basically puts in contractual obligations in back to back arrangements, kind of going back to the ship owners and charterers, which ask people to decarbonize shipping, which means having solar shipping, looking at alternate fuels. But alternate fuels are right now in large demand and short supply, and the prices are very high. So, but somehow sulfur and ballast water have been forgotten, whereas everyone is rushing towards decarbonization. And that, going back to my point, is because people keep forgetting to look at science and look at what is the major problem. So once we see what are the major problems, have the intent to then address it, I think that would probably be a first step of solving some of those issues.
And taking it a step further, how do you think blue economy can be more inclusive from a gender lens?
How many women panelists do you have today?
We have
So
we have three women panelists today.
that's great. That's great. So I think that's a good place to start. And I think from a gender lens, it's always important to be mindful, of course, of the gender angle. But I think again, if you look at blue economy as a concept and you look at all the financial instruments that are available, you look at all the multilateral banks, you look at the law firms, you look at consulting firms, you look at the decision makers, and you see how many decision makers are women. And I think that will give you a good idea of what the gender balance looks like in today's day and age, no matter how many International Women's Day slogans we may make. And then when we actually trickle down to the lowest rung, the actual shucker of the oyster or the actual puller of the seaweed is usually women. But unfortunately, that's not reflected in the decision making place. So I think that from a gender lens, so far as I'm concerned, is the main thing, that we need more women in leadership roles, in decision making roles that can then percolate down across the investment chain.
Great. We hope that the gender balance definitely is achieved going forward, starting with our panel and all right to the highest levels of decision making. But coming on to you, Mr. Byron, could you talk more about your opinion on the Sustainable Development Goals and their working towards marine life and the conservation of our oceans?
I'd first like to start by thanking the organizers and for inviting me on this panel, and I'm also honored to be on this panel with these other esteemed panelists. And before answering your question, I just quickly wanted to go on the gender balance, which would have been even greater because my fantastic colleague Eva Monar was actually invited, but she's currently on maternity leave, so I am here replacing her. On your question, on the Sustainable Development Goals and the blue economy, and then also how it is interlinked with trade and international trade law. It's a good question because and it also touches upon everything that has been said by the other panelists. On the one hand, you have the blue economy, which is inherently driven by trade. Fisheries, a lot of it is exported, so that's international trade. We have maritime shipping, that's the backbone of the global trading system. More and more also for environmental purposes, we have offshore energy projects and all of these, and there you then have a very difficult balance with, on the one hand, fostering international trade, which is also uplifting global people out of poverty, on the one hand, which is one of the Sustainable Development Goals, while at the same time trying to do this in an as sustainable way as possible, which also touches upon other different Sustainable Development Goals. A very big problem with the blue economy is getting this balance right, while at the same time fostering this economic growth without, for instance, doing the overexploitation of our marine resources, such as fishing. Many, also the technology is not always there yet, but the ideas of getting many mineral resources out of our oceans to a further extent than we're currently doing will probably cause quite some environmental damage. So getting this right is a bit of a difficult topic, and that's why it's also good that it's being looked into. The friction between them also, on the one hand, the old industrialized economies, and now the emerging economies and the developing economies, where as also Professor Abhijit Das made some interesting comments there, with which surprisingly I actually quite agree with a lot of those comments. Where on the one hand you do have the classically industrialized economies, which were able to develop quite largely by causing all of the environmental concerns we have today, and where now, probably also because they managed to develop early, have now time to think of other things and trying to call for more sustainable development, which I do believe that there is some good faith in there, and that probably the main purpose is indeed environmental protection and sustainable development, but I also do strongly believe that there is quite some green protectionism in there as well, and trying to keep established industries established. So yes, there is a lot of interlinkage there between many of the different topics that we've spoken about, and which makes it difficult on how to address this, because our oceans, they're a global public good. We're talking about also the exclusive economic zones, but most of the oceans are actually the international high seas, where there is very little regulation. And how do you deal with this development of the blue economy, whereby you have indeed certain jurisdictions with far greatly developed industries, which do result in all these issues such as the overfishing and the overexploitation, while at the same time ensuring that island states and coastal regions can also benefit from this blue economy.
Thank you, Byron. And taking it further, what is your opinion on where the WTO stands presently in its goal of achieving blue economy, and what are you most excited for in the future?
Well, when it comes to WTO as a trade lawyer, I'm more depressed than excited with how it has gotten completely blocked. Actually, starting with the Doha round back in 2001, which started blocking things once the um, uh, emerging economies and developing countries found their voice, and that more established, industrialized nations realized that they couldn't continue deciding things as they wanted to, and that's where you see the same friction, not just on the environmental protection perspective, but also more generally everywhere internationally on international agreements. And then, which now also has culminated in the complete blocking of the appellate body. So let's see how we're going to get over that. But what I also see the WTO, when it is functioning properly, is as a vehicle which can help protect sustainable development goals, also from an environmental perspective. And one of the landmark cases there from the late 90s is the U.S. Shrimp turtle case, which incidentally also had to do with the blue economy, which shows that I feel that the WTO can be used offensively and defensively for different jurisdictions wishing to sustainably develop region. And giving a very small background, I'm sure all the panelists know about this case, but maybe not all the participants. It was just in the United States for shrimp trawling. There was a measure that was imposed to basically protect marine turtles. And this case was this measure was touted as a purely an environmental measure, and here we come again to the comments made by Professor Abhijit Das. There was actually quite some discrimination in there as well. This case was brought by certain countries, including India, to the WTO, and the United States lost the case because the measure was indeed found to be discriminatory. And you had at the time, and which you see quite often with these environmental WTO cases, a lot of NGOs shouting the WTO is destroying the environment, it is not allowing proper environmental measures, but which also is, in my honest opinion, completely wrong, because there was a very interesting part of the Apple Body report where they said what they were and were not doing. The WTO Apple Body clearly said what we are not doing here is preventing WTO members from legislating to protect the environment. What we are doing here is ensuring that this is done in a non-discriminatory manner. What was found was that for certain areas and in certain jurisdictions, it was much easier for the industries to comply with these measures, and perhaps unsurprisingly, it was the easiest for the US fishing sector to comply with these measures, whereas in certain other jurisdictions, this was much harder. Following this, the US passed certain amendments to their measure. The case was brought before the WTO again, and then the WTO actually rubber stamped this measure and said, well, the way that it is formed now is in a non-discriminatory manner, so you can protect, in this case, sea turtles, but you have to do it in a non-discriminatory manner. Similar case several years later was, again, the US tuna dolphin case, where measures were taken for sustainable fishing of tuna to protect dolphins. Here again, at first, the measure was found to be WTO inconsistent. NGOs shouted, well, the WTO is killing dolphins. But again, what was found was that the measure was actually being implemented in a very discriminatory manner, because they're the biggest competitors of the US tuna fishers were actually Mexican tuna fishers. And what was found was that in the seas, in the oceans where the US fishers were predominantly fishing their tuna, there were different measures for compliance as compared to other regions, which just happened to be the regions where the Mexican fishers were predominantly fishing. This was therefore found to be discriminatory. Following the WTO report, the US had to pass certain amendments. this case was brought before the WTO again, but then it was again rubber stamped because it was done in a non-discriminatory manner. We can go on and on about these cases. There's a similar one with the EU. We don't only have to attack the US. There was the EU with the safe seal measures, so the seal cases, where seal products were being banned, but it happened to be that certain regions in the EU and certain EU allies were being treated in a more favorable manner than others. So I do believe that trade law and the WTO can play an important role in ensuring that there are measures that can help sustainable development. Because if you have a measure that is discriminatory, an environmental measure that is discriminatory, that also means that it's not working properly, because you have certain exceptions which makes it easier for certain countries to comply or not comply with the idea behind these measures. And very often the result of these WTO cases has been not that the measure is watered down from an environmental protection perspective, but that the measure actually becomes stricter and therefore helps reach that objective much stronger. And there, I believe, going towards the future, the WTO can play a very important role, assuming that it is a functioning organization, because we are seeing increasingly more and more of these environmental ESG measures coming out of the United States, but also the EU, the proposed anti-deforestation regulation, the proposed anti-forced labor regulation in the EU, the corporate sustainability due diligence directive, all measures which are going to, or are very likely to have significant impact on global supply chains, and for also impact India. And there it is important that countries on the receiving end, such as India, do ensure that they exercise their rights at international fora, such as the WTO, to make sure that there's no hidden protectionism in there, and if there is such hidden protectionism, to try to get it out.
Thank you for that, Byron. Now on to Ms. Shishira. Ms. Shishira, I'd like to know your opinion on the Sustainable Development Goals as well and their contribution to ocean life, as I'd asked.
Very good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having me on this panel. It's been quite interesting to sit and listen to all of the different views going around. And I'll come to your question of sustainability, sustainable development goals and blue economy. I think Byron has more or less sort of touched upon these key elements of the SDGs. The SDGs on a whole, as said in the 2030 agenda, does have references to marine life in the SDG 14, and then you have the whole point of SDGs is that elements like these can sort of find basis in more than one area. So you would find its basis in social perspectives, you'll find its basis in trade, and I think Byron has sort of explained on that part. But the one thing that I would like to sort of bring about is like how it has been mentioned by Byron, that there are unilateral measures that are being taken by different countries. The question at this moment is in the process of fulfilling your commitment to your SDGs and in the process of protecting your ecosystems, it should not be that it should be at a disadvantage of the trade benefits a lot of countries would have in these areas. And the very countries that have or would have trade benefits here would be the developing countries or the SIDSs. And they are at the moment, like how the moderator mentioned a little earlier today, they're yet to be involved in the policy making systems of blue economy, right? So sustainability as a goal is being touted for blue economy processes internationally, multilaterally. However, there is a call for developing countries to bring their voice out, maybe if not possibly multilaterally, at least domestically in their national policies, to be ready to tackle any of these unilateral measures that come up in the guise of sustainability and protect their trade interests, therefore. And then probably a discussion that could take place between trading partners would be beneficial. But the end of the day, balancing sustainability and trade for this particular area, I think, falls on the developing countries' domestic policy development. And that is something that these countries would have to wake up to a lot sooner than later, once all of these unilateral measures are already in place, and then we're doing the catch-up game of trying to figure out how to tackle these unilateral measures without having any domestic systems in place.
All right. And as you mentioned the domestic policies that developing countries must bring about. I believe recently India had brought about its draft blue economic policy. So what are your opinions on that policy, and what would you like to have been included in it?
Thank you. The draft policy has some benefits from its predecessor of the 2017 version. I think it's still in a very premature stage. It does give policy themes that the policymakers should then function on or should work on thereafter, but it is in no means at this stage to sort of trickle down and impact the on-ground community. For the on-ground community, that policy could be there, could not be there. It doesn't affect them as much today. So I think it's yet to be seen how it would be impactful. It is a good amount of statements that are put in there that supports blue economy, that supports offshore aquaculture and a lot of other marine systems that are being discussed. But in terms of actual concrete regulations that help these communities, I don't see much yet, but I think it's too early to comment on that as well, since it's just a policy stage and it's not even been adopted yet. So, yeah.
That's true. Thank you, Ms. Shishira. And I'd like to pass the mic back to Professor Abhijit for his opinions on the draft blue economic policy, and also to pass the concluding comments on this session and his takeaways from the.
Right. Thanks a lot. This has been a very interesting set of discussions. No, Shishira has very succinctly put the different aspects of the blue economy, draft blue economy policy of the government, and she's highlighted the main aspects. And also, this still remains a policy. We have to see concrete programs being rolled out. And so it's a bit early to second guess what might be the impact. But the important message which I get from the blue economy policy of the government is that there is a cognizance of the huge economic potential of the blue economy. There is also a realization of taking suitable measures to make sure that sustainability is respected. That is a sentiment which permeates a large number of government policies. And at the same time, we really will have to wait to see how all this evolves, how this unfolds. Now, one common theme which I derive from most of the speakers is that blue economy has a lot of potential. Absolutely no denying that at all. But at the same time, what we need to realize is which will be the countries who will be able to exploit that potential, and what will it take to exploit the potential. I think that is where there is some bit of divergence in perspectives. The key thing will be for the private sector to see if without government support, it's able to exploit the potential. If yes, then we do stand to garner gains from the opportunities which blue economy poses for us. But at the same time, if the private sector of itself, without government support, without government intervention, is unable to tap these opportunities, then the opportunities will just remain potential for us. And that is where the apprehension is. We did hear some very interesting examples given by Mr. Amod Salgaonkar about green sovereign bonds. That is very useful, but then we will really have to see to what extent would the green sovereign bonds themselves be covered by the disciplines of the subsidies agreement and hence prohibited. So at this juncture, it's an interesting area to look out for. And over here, maybe Shishira could without leaking state secrets, mention the enormous pressure which she is under on issues of environment sustainability in the trade negotiations. The objective in the trade negotiations is very clear, objective of the developed countries. Make sure that the opportunities which are there through the conditions around sustainability, make sure that they do not create new competitors. I think that is where the concern is, and that is where legal scholars really need to apply their minds. My theme over here is simple, straightforward. The law will be equally applicable, but it will have very, very different implications, different impacts, depending on the initial conditions. And maybe that's an area where HNLU could put on its thinking caps, and the brilliant young legal minds could try to explore how the same set of laws, given countries being at different stages of development, how the same set of laws at the WTO or in the High Seas Treaty, how the implications could be entirely different from the development perspective. So I'm going to stop at that. I have spoken enough. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you to all the panelists for such an enriching session. I'm sure we all took a lot more of our understanding on blue economy, and thank you for your wonderful comments once again. With that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Anindya to deliver the vote of thanks for this session today.
Thank you. Thank you is such a prayer that cannot be seen or touched. It must be felt by heart. I feel honored and privileged to get the opportunity to propose the vote of thanks on this special occasion. Special thanks to Professor Abhijit Das, International Trade Policy and WTO expert, Dr. V.R. Madhu, Principal Scientist, ICAR, Central Institute of Fisheries Technology, Dr. Sanu Jacob, Director, National Food Laboratory, Chennai, Mr. Amod Ashok Salgaonkar, Director, Chamber for Advancement of Small and Medium Business in India, Ms. Ipshita Chaturvedi, Partner, Environment and Natural Resource Law, Denton, Roddick, Singapore, Ms. Anu Moga, Partner, Anant Law Solicitors and Advocate, New Delhi, Mr. Byron Maniatis, Senior Associate, Steptoe and Johnson LLP, Washington, DC, Ms. Shishira Johnny, International Trade Lawyer and Policy Advisor. I, on behalf of Organizing Committee of the conference, thank all the honorable delegates who helped us with their presence on a Sunday afternoon. I am also very thankful to Dr. Ankita Awasthi, OS of the event, and the team constituting of faculty members and students for ensuring free flow of academic discourse on intersection of trade and ecology. I take this opportunity to recognize the support extended by the university administration with all its support staff, which helped us make this event a successful one. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you all for joining. The permission of Professor Abhijit sir, we can conclude this thing, and we can take up the findings, and we will include the same in the conference reports as well. So thank you all for joining. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, bye.
Thank you.